That's right.
Yeah, I'd like to hear, I'm sure some of our listeners would like to hear a little bit about how you came to the path that you're on right now.
Sure. I was involved in all the political turmoil revolution in Berkeley in the late 60s. I was a student at Berkeley and participated in all kinds of movements against the war in Vietnam and all that stuff, various other issues. So it was a spirit of the age that we wanted to right the wrongs of the world as we understood that, and also apart from my political and social concerns, I had a more personal concern with my own enlightenment. Uh, I thought it was really putting the cart before the horse to try to figure out what my career would be if I didn't really understood who I am and why do I exist, the purpose of my life, all that stuff. So, make a long story short, and to use the cliche, I was searching, I was examining all kinds of world religions, and I was open minded. I took it for granted that God or the truth was present in many places. I never thought and still don't think that there's only one true religion, everything else is false, and blah, blah, blah. So I wasn't looking for the only true religion. I was just looking for the most efficient spiritual process and the most comprehensive, systematic, plausible explanation of everything. In other words, philosophy. So I found it in Krishna consciousness. Uh, Again, I think not on sentimental grounds or blind faith, but I believe on reasonable grounds. And I threw myself into it, heart and soul, as they say, and ended up traveling around the world many times and doing all kinds of things, and here I am. No, it wasn't an irreligious family. We just didn't go to a religious center all the time, but it was a, pious family, I would say, good values, good principles, and we were given basic religious education. So I feel very fortunate to have been born in the family that I was.
One of the aspects of the path that you've taken is also connected to our Hridayananda das Goswami or Goswami. Some of the listeners in our audience is the renounced order of life, so to speak. Of course, bhakti perspective on renounced order of life is a little different than maybe the Advaitin perspective. But that also adds an interesting element to who you are and what you've done in life. I know you've traveled extensively in not only the world, but you spent a lot of time in South America. And from my recollection, you speak several languages fluently, like Spanish and Portuguese, I think Italian.
Yeah, sort of French, a bit of German, and of course my old friend Sanskrit. Yeah, Goswami, as you mentioned, it's renounced order of life in many traditions, Buddhism, Christianity, uh, and certainly what you could call roughly Hinduism, uh, especially I would say, but not only there, but especially there. There's the notion of uh, renouncing the world in order to serve the world. I mean, there are different philosophies of monastic life or renounced life. There's one concept where one literally gives up the world or physically removes oneself from society, either by going, into a jungle, onto a mountaintop or a desert, or depending on what the geography is, locally, but in our tradition, one gives up the world in the sense of one gives up, in the sense that one gives up the desire or aspiration to exploit the world, to enjoy the world, and rather one tries to devote oneself to serving the world by bringing spiritual knowledge to it and helping people to achieve spiritual liberation. So it's not literally rejecting the world, it's rather, I mean, obviously the bottom line here is that one does not marry and raise children, although uh, after one has married and after one has raised children, one can then, of course, ultimately dedicate oneself fully to spiritual life, and even many married people with children dedicate themselves to spiritual life. So an absolute requirement. It's just I found in my own life it was just natural for me, and it gave me a lot of extra time to do what I most wanted to do.
Like the Bhakti path in general really allows one individual expression in terms of what their path looks like. For you said it was sort of a natural evolution on your journey, on your path to take to the renounced order of life. You gave a nice overview of what that means in terms of the Bhakti perspective. And for others, as you also mentioned, get married and have children, and also dedicating their lives to embracing the world and giving them the tenets of spirituality through the Bhakti path. So, what I wanted to ask you is, in most recent days, you've used your Sanskrit ability to translate a Bhagavad Gita, it's titled A Comprehensive Guide to Bhagavad Gita with Literal Translation by H.D.Goswami. Um, was that a labor of love for many years? Was it a sudden inspiration? What was the story behind getting into translating the Bhagavad Gita?
Well, I've loved the Gita and studied the Gita and read the Gita, especially in Sanskrit, after having learned it from my guru. Prabhupada, for most of my life, I mean, 2/3 of my life, I've been reading the Gita, trying to practice it as best I could. And I really love the text. So I always had the idea of one day trying to present sort of the cumulative understanding that I'd been blessed with. And so I finally did it. It didn't take that long to write. It took several months, I think, maybe 4 or 5 months. And I did it in Santa Monica, California, for the record. And I set myself what I found to be an interesting set of ground rules, and that I wanted to. What I ended up doing, I studied the Sanskrit text of the Gita, and I tried to explain the Gita or understand the Gita strictly in terms of its own literal Sanskrit text. And by literal, I mean that for the words, I just took the common meaning you find in the dictionary. If you go to the, Sanskrit English dictionary, uh, that's what the words mean, at least in the first instance. I avoided esoteric meanings of words. There are some parts of the Gita which are very explicit and simple. Other parts are somewhat esoteric and arcane, and I just sort of left everything as it is. Uh, so that my goal was, because I love the Sanskrit text so much, and since most people I know are not fluent in Sanskrit, therefore my goal was to give the reader, as far as possible, the same experience in reading the text in English, the same experience that I have in reading the text in Sanskrit. And of course, we all know the limitations of language and so on, of translation. They say in Spanish, traductor, traidor, translator, traitor. Somewhat cynical view of translation, but um, I personally am convinced that there are real universals in life, love and justice and all kinds of things. They may look a little different in different cultures, but ultimately, if you sort of dig deeper, you find that uh, there is a type of universal wisdom in the world and that people in many different cultures can agree on a lot of things, although they may come at it in a somewhat different way. Uh, so rather than quoting other texts, I mean, within our tradition, it's common to explain a Gita verse by quoting another scripture. But I gave myself that challenge, which is obviously not the only way to read the text. But so, for example, let's say the word yoga. What does Krishna mean when he uses the Sanskrit word yoga? Well, I looked at all the different places in the entire text where the word yoga appears, and then I, so to speak, let Krishna define his own terms, whether it was the word yoga or karma or God or the word for nature or all the different kinds of yoga and so on. In all these cases, I tried to stay strictly within the Gita Sanskrit text and see how Krishna himself was defining his own terms. And of course, as I said, that was the guide to the Gita, and then in the translation itself, I did everything I could possibly do so that your experience of reading a verse in English is very much like the experience of reading it in Sanskrit. And I did that by trying to keep the approximate word count the same, because you think about it, if you're reading a text and let's say an author says something, whether it's, whether the passage is descriptive or definitional or conceptual or philosophical, whatever the passage may be, if an author says something, let's say with 50 words, that's different in some ways than even if the author says the same thing, but with 20 words, because the human brain is sort of seeing. I think that sometimes the fewer words you use, the more it allows the human brain to make connections, to see everything all at once in relation to everything else, juxtaposed. Of course, you can become too brief, and so sometimes you need more language just to make things clearer. But I tried to keep things clear, but to keep approximately the same number of words in English as in Sanskrit, even rhythm and word order. I really tried as far as it's possible. Of course, one cannot do it absolutely, but I think it's possible to go pretty far down the road of giving the reader, the English-speaking reader, a very similar experience to what the verse is like in Sanskrit. And of course, that requires, as I said, being very literal, like whatever the Sanskrit word is, saying exactly what that word means. In English, as far as there is a one-to-one equivalent. Sometimes there's not, sometimes there is, but in general, getting as close as I can in English to the original simple dictionary meaning of each Sanskrit word. Because even if you, let's say one is inclined toward esoteric meanings, something which is below the surface, and certainly that's possible, but I think you always have to start with the literal meaning. Because even if you're, let's say, fluent in the original language, in this case Sanskrit, and you read a particular passage, a sentence, a phrase, or whatever, even if you see something deeper under the semantic surface, still there is a surface, and that surface is the literal sense of the word. And so rather than just go straight from, let's say, from the Sanskrit, which may have a surface meaning and perhaps an underlying meaning, rather than just going straight to the underlying meaning in English, I wanted to give you first the literal meaning in English as it is in Sanskrit, and then you can engage in that same process the Sanskrit reader would, and that is to go beneath the surface. So I hope that's all clear.
That's what one of the things I wanted to ask. Literal translation has been done before. The way they approach it. Like you said, in our particular line, our lineage, the Gaudiya lineage, there's oftentimes quotes from other scriptures and quotes from other commentators. So is this fairly new to our lineage, or any lineage for that matter, the literal, actual word for word meaning of
I'm sure that I'm not the first person to do this. There is a tradition within our lineage to quote many different scriptures. Uh, the problem with the Gita is that everyone says, oh, that's just your opinion because there's like 17 trillion different translations of the Gita, and that's just your view on it. And so I think if we go too far into subjectivism, that everything is just someone's opinion, uh, there's danger because you can push subjectivism so far that ultimately nothing means anything, or everything means nothing. And so, um, obviously, we're all individuals. We all have our own take on things. Even if we even if we say something very simple like "It's a nice day today," I mean, every one of us will understand that in a somewhat different way. But still, that's that simple English statement, "It's a nice day." Everyone knows what those words mean, and there is a family resemblance between all of our understandings if we're all sort of sane and we understand English. So, because there tends to be this sort of, I think, an exaggerated sense of the subjectivity of any particular understanding of the Gita, rather than, I wanted to really make my case that if you take the words, what they literally mean, and of course, you can always from there expand to esoteric meanings, but an esoteric meaning does not obliterate the literal meaning, it just sort of extends the meaning. And so uh, that's why I decided just stay very strictly and tightly within the Sanskrit text so that I could make my case that if you take seriously what words literally mean, as in the dictionary, this is what Krishna is saying in the Bhagavad Gita.
One thing I've always wondered, reading Gita, also teaching Gita, is there an obvious evolution of the use of the word yoga from Krishna's perspective?
Yeah, the word yoga. The word yoga comes from the Sanskrit yuj, which means to connect or link or to employ or engage. And we still have traces of that in English, such as the word yoke, in the sense of like yoking two things together, like an ox to a plow, in the sense of connecting things, or the yug, English jug, as in conjugal, which means an intimate connection between two things. Conjugal. So yoga literally means connection, link, and also application or practice. And so, so yoga in the Gita really means, or often means, a spiritual practice, some kind of spiritual practice. So if you talk about, for example, dhyana yoga, meditation yoga, it simply means that it's a spiritual practice in which the central activity is meditating. Or if you talk about karma yoga, uh, karma, we should say a word about the word karma. There is a popular meaning of the word karma, which is also one of its, original Sanskrit meanings, that meaning a sort of a cosmic system in which whatever we do in the universe comes back to us. So the good we do comes back to us, the evil we do comes back to us, and that coming back means that it influences our life, what happens to us, situation we're in, future lives, reincarnation takes place not randomly, because samsara or reincarnation simply means that, as the word literally means, reincarnation, to re-enflesh oneself, to go from one body to another. But that transmigration of the soul is not random or whimsical. It actually obeys laws, and that set of laws are karma. So the word karma comes from a Sanskrit root kur or kri, from which we have English words like create or increase. If you know Spanish or Portuguese, crecer. So so again, it's a root which still has cognates in English and other Western languages. So karma, in the most simple, basic sense, karma simply means action. And action, of course, the idea that you do something voluntarily, you do something intentionally. It's not something that's done to you, or like, for say, someone pushes you and you fall forward or fall backward, that's not karma. You didn't do anything, something was done to you. So karma means something you intentionally do, and therefore something for which you are responsible. So ultimately, we act again, not entirely randomly, but in fact, each of us has a particular nature. We're all unique individuals, we all have a particular nature. And that nature is not only, let's say, that I have these or those kinds of emotions, but that nature is also that I'm inclined to work in this world in a particular way, as an artist, as a business person, as a teacher, as, as whatever. And so karma yoga in this context means that whatever you do in the world, basically your career, your vocation, your profession, just what you do in the world, because as Krishna says, Shariram jatrapi chate na prasidhyeta karma. Without doing something, without karma, you can't even keep your body alive. You have to eat, you have to work, you have to get by in the world. So whatever you do in the world, you transform that into a spiritual practice, karma yoga. The way we do that is that we dedicate our work to God. We dedicate our work to God. Now, there is a popular idea that if you simply dedicate the work to anyone, like I'm working for my kid brother, or or I'm working for my family, or I'm working for a yoga center, whatever. It's not exactly in every sense karma yoga. I mean, the basic structure is there in the sense that I'm doing something karma, but I'm offering it in the spirit of making spiritual progress. But ultimately, as Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita, whatever we offer, Krishna says, Jet Karoshi, Jedasnasi, Jet Juhoshi, whatever we do, whatever we offer, we should offer to God. Because otherwise, you could say anyone that does anything for anyone else is doing karma yoga. But it's not exactly like that. It's a little more strict. Specifically, we understand that we are all part of God. This is what the Gita teaches. And so I may help another person, or I should help other people, but I'm doing so in that spirit that we are all part of God, and therefore, for the pleasure of God, I I am helping other people because God loves them, and therefore it's pleasing to God. But then again, we have to understand what is real help. I mean, obviously, you feed a hungry person, you clothe, well, someone that doesn't have enough clothes, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, we want to give not merely palliative care, but real benefit. For example, let's say someone has a disease, and therefore they need to take some, pain relievers, or they need to rest, or this or that. There's all kinds of palliative measures, but ultimately, the disease itself has to be addressed and has to be cured if possible. So there's all kinds of welfare programs in the world, and that's nice. It's nice that people help each other, but they often are palliative. For example, let's say you bring fresh water to people that don't have it, or food to people that are hungry, or you bring shelter to people who are homeless. That's all good. That should be done. I mean, everyone should have a decent life. But there are a lot of people, in fact, billions of people in this world that already have food and water and have houses, and they're not really happy, and sometimes they're not even good people. And with all the material stuff in the world, we still get old, become diseased, and die. And so we want to live forever. I mean, there always are a few suicidal people here and there, but most people, given a choice, would live and not die. And so we want to live, we want to be happy, we want knowledge, and these most fundamental desires are regularly frustrated in this world, because no matter how much we study, we still, let's say, the highest truths tend to elude us. And we want to be happy, but almost all the time we would actually like to be a little happier than we are, or much happier than we are, and we want to survive forever, but we don't. So to help people, in Sanskrit it's called Satchidananda, which means permanent existence, pure understanding of everything, and real spiritual bliss. So to bring people back to their original spiritual nature, which, how should I put it? Because to be eternal, to be wise, and to be fully happy is the nature of the soul. So to give people all these supreme benefits, we merely have to bring people back to their own original nature. And that's the sense of yoga, of linking to God, to our original nature. So we have to, of course, we should provide palliative care in an existential sense, but ultimately people need to rediscover who they ultimately really are and to enjoy eternal life of bliss and knowledge. And to work in this world and offer those actions to God with that goal in mind. With that goal in mind, that's the true karma yoga.
Several of my questions with that explanation, because one thing I've often pondered is also the neurologic version is progression and how it presents. Traditionally, they accepted that Krishna first was karma yoga. Explanation of karma yoga is in the first 6 chapters of the Gita. Then he moves into
Um, Progression, is there a progression in the various yogas Krishna teaches in the Gita? I had always heard, and therefore kind of assumed, because I never really checked it, that one from karma yoga, one then goes on to jnana yoga and then to bhakti. But I looked everywhere in the Gita, but actually Krishna doesn't really privilege jnana yoga above bhakti yoga. I mean, we know that there's a general progression that one works in this world and then the desire for knowledge awakens, as in the first statement of Vedanta, the Brahma Sutras, the Tato Brahma Jigyasa. Now that we worked in the world and tried to enjoy ordinary things, now let's go after knowledge. But actually, the real point of the Gita is bhakti, love or devotion. For example, let's say parents have 2 children. One of the children is actively working in the world, maybe the other kid's a scholar. The real point is, if the children love their parents and the parents love their children, that's what's important. From the perspective of the loving parents, one child may be acting in the world dynamically, another child maybe is more scholarly or whatever, but if they're both good people and they both really do something for themselves and for the world, then what does it mean to say one is better than the other? So the real point is bhakti. If we come to the point of love, loving God, Krishna, and loving each other, it doesn't matter so much from Krishna's point of view how we got there if we come to the point of bhakti. Because after all, the particular yoga one may be inclined to, like dhyana yoga, meditation, jnana yoga, which is spiritual practice based on cultivating knowledge, or karma yoga, which means dedicating your profession, your occupation, your vocation to God, and so on. The yoga that fits for us in that sense is really just based on what kind of body we got in this life. We're all born with a certain nature, so you find a yoga that fits your nature. But the point of all the yogas, as Krishna keeps telling us in the Gita, the real point of all these yogas is to come to the point of pure love of God, pure love of other souls. And so bhakti, which means pure devotion, is the goal of every kind of spiritual practice. And one may take up bhakti yoga directly by devoting oneself directly to Krishna. And so that's kind of the fast track, where rather than do something else and then somehow devote it, you just immediately take to the spiritual practice of devotion itself, and that's bhakti yoga. Yes, yeah, I'll explain that right now. Just have to, 1 second. Okay, I'll explain that verse. The verse is, yoginam api sarvesham, which means indeed of all yogis. The word api is also significant. Indeed of all yogis, the one who is madgatena antaratmana, the one who has come to me or gone to me with the inner self, antaratma, the inner self, one whose inner self, sometimes translated the mind, but literally the inner self, one whose inner self has gone to me. So it's not superficial. It doesn't just mean following some, external religious rituals, although those have their place also. But it means really your inner self, your true self, your core. You've really gone to Krishna. Madgatena antaratmana and shraddhavan, and one who has faith. And here the word faith, shraddha, doesn't simply mean to believe that God exists. That's not the point. It's Shraddha is more than that. There's a word astikya, which simply means believing that God exists. The word shraddha means you really put your heart into it. You really trust something. And so Krishna says, one who shraddhavan has this shraddha, this real trusting faith, and bhajate jo mam, and worships me. Krishna says, same yukta tamomata. I consider that person to be most yukta. Now, what does that mean of all yogis? Because the word yukta is made from the same root as the word yoga. If yoga means link or say connection, then yukta means connected. So obviously, if yoga is the process of connecting, to be yukta means it worked. You did it. You're connected. It means you've actually achieved success in yoga. And so by saying yukta tama, the most connected, Krishna is saying of all yogis, the one who is most successful in yoga, or the one who is the highest in yoga, is the one who worships me with real trust and faith, and whose inner self has gone to me. So is there another way to translate that? Not really. Not unless you just want to, amuse yourself by ignoring what words actually mean and pretend they mean something else. But if you, and if you, it's like, for example, you could read a book, a manual on, let's say, fixing a radio, and you can say it's really love poetry to aliens from another planet. I mean, so you can say anything means anything. But then at a certain point, it's like, why even read a book? Because if someone doesn't really care very much what the words are, and it's going to bring their own meaning to it, no matter what the words on the page say, then why even bother with the page? So for those people who take seriously that words have meanings, and that it's like if I say to you, I like you, and you say you're telling me you don't like me, and I said no, I say I like you, yes, but at a certain point it just becomes ridiculous that no matter what someone says, you say it means something else. You can see this will simply sabotage any real hope for communication, for relationship, for sanity. So we have to be a little careful about just declaring that words don't mean what they actually mean. And so if we take seriously what Krishna is saying, if we just look at what the words mean, that's what the words mean. No, no, no. Well, I don't think I'd say that, not in terms of translation, certainly, because if you look at, highly respected scholars, first of all, you have to understand what the words mean. I mean, I don't think if you mean, because, in the modern world, some people actually know Sanskrit and some people don't. And so if I'm looking at modernity, I want to see what people are doing who actually know what the words mean. Well, the Bhagavad Gita is relevant to the extent that it's talking about universal principles. It's just like, thousands of years ago, if you fell off if you fell off a building, you'd hurt yourself, and that still happens. So, I mean, it's not that I think sometimes in our vanity, we tend to exaggerate how everything is different. I mean, clearly the world in some ways is different now, but love is still love, and justice is still justice. Kindness is still kindness. And, words have meanings. And so, we can become narcissistic about our own culture and think that our modern world has nothing to do with any previous age, and everything in the universe is different now than it used to be. But not really. I mean, for example, the whole field of astronomy, they say that, let's say, a star is so many light years away, and so we see a star, but the light that we're seeing left that celestial body maybe millions of years ago. So we're assuming that the laws of nature still operate today as they operated then. I mean, if you think about it, fields that study the remote past, like astronomy, geology, archaeology, and so on, uh, we have to be careful about just thinking in a very narcissistic way that everything about ourselves is unique. Because, for all of our computers and technology and blah, 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 when it all comes down to it, we're just people. And people are people. And those who actually study history seriously see that very clearly. That's why I find the study of history so fascinating, because you study people and events that took place long ago, but you see, my God, they're like us. Their feelings, the way they reason, their values. So I mean, obviously the world's different now, but we shouldn't exaggerate that. And I think it'd be really tragic if in our obsession with our own uniqueness, we completely forget what's universal about us, and the universal qualities that connect us to all people that have lived at all times and places. It's that universality which I think ultimately is the most profound aspect of our existence, not the fact that when Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita, they didn't have iPads or something. Yeah, that's right. Because we exist in a particular historical time and place. At the same time, we are within a universe that has a lot of uniform laws, and ultimately, we are spiritual beings. Well, I think I think that's, yeah, it's sort of common sense. I mean, if you think about all of us, you know, many people go to work, they have a job, but they know that, well, this is not ultimately who I am, maybe when I'm with my family or when I'm doing what I really love. So the fact that we have a human life, but we're spiritual beings is, yeah, that's the whole point of the Gita. And obviously, even though we may be spiritual practitioners, we still have to stop at red lights and go at green lights, and we still have to take seriously our human emotions and psychology. And in order to transcend our human condition, we have to deeply understand it and respect it and work with it appropriately. So yes, so Krishna is teaching Arjuna how to be a good human being, and at the same time how to transcend the human condition and become a pure soul.
I'm working on a project Krishna West. Explain to me what your vision of Krishna West is.
Yes, thank you. Krishna West is an attempt to take the pure spiritual science and this great wisdom and make it easily available to people in the Western world without making them jump through all kinds of ethnic hoops. In other words, it's not that God will love you more or you'll love God more if you wear Indian clothes, for example. Nothing wrong with traditional Indian clothes. You know, they were clothes that were people liked in a certain part of the world based on their climate and culture and so on. I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, but there's also nothing intrinsically spiritual about it. It's just the way people in a certain part of the world dressed. And so, if we study the ancient texts, if we study sacred texts like Bhagavatam Gita, we find there's virtually no interest on the part of Krishna or the sages or the great teachers. They have virtually no interest in setting up rules about how we should dress and what kind of recipes we should use or what kind of musical instruments we use or our styles of architecture. If anything, they just say that we should be virtuous, do things virtuously, decently, and of course, they appreciated beauty. But the idea that somehow there's a particular ethnic tradition which somehow gives one a huge advantage in just trying to love God, I don't think that's the case. The wisdom that comes, let's say, from India, the wisdom is extraordinary. And we know that Krishna and his avatar appeared there, but if we look at external Indian culture, we know because it's obvious if you actually study these things that it's a combination of, you could say, indigenous Indian culture, Muslim culture, European culture. That's true in the food they eat, in their architecture, in their music, in their dress style, virtually in all aspects of what you could call external culture. There's a mixture. Plus, India has been successfully invaded a number of times. Around the time of Christ, there was a successful invasion by a group called the Kushans that came from Central Asia. They eventually became assimilated and became part of the Indian Hindu culture. But they also, I mean, even if you read the ancient texts, let's say like the great Rajasuya sacrifice of King Yudhishthira of the Mahabharata, when kings from around the world are bringing him tribute, it's clear that there was international commerce and there was international trade, you know, whether it was clothes or jewelry. There were different musical styles. So uh, it's just not, I think that if we set a condition that if you want the spiritual knowledge, if you want the spiritual practice, you have to embrace some foreign ethnic tradition which is external and has no intrinsic connection to the knowledge itself or the spiritual practice. Why are we doing that to people? That would be my question. You know, why are we doing that to people? Just as people have a comfort food, there are people have their own comfort culture. Why not let people just be themselves, but adopt spiritual practice and, and 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 receive spiritual wisdom in a way that's comfortable for them. So that's Krishna West, trying to teach Krishna consciousness as a spiritual science, not as an spiritual slash ethnic tradition. And it's really working. It's having actually fantastic results. So with that note, unfortunately, my time is kind of up here. So and yours probably is too. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak to you and all people that are with you. And I'd like to personally thank everyone that's listened. I appreciate your, I know you have, everyone nowadays is busy and your time is valuable and precious. So thank you for spending some time with me. Thank you. Take care.